So
See it?
welcome back to My Spiritual Experience with your host, Brother Sadiq. Today we have a friend of mine, and our special guest today is Dan Enslow. He is a member and a leader of the Baha'i community here in Bloomington, Indiana. And today we're going to talk to him about his spiritual experience and, of course, welcome him to the show. Welcome, of course, Mr. Enslow.
Yep.
There we go. There we go. I got it too. I got it. Yeah, that's the inside greeting between me and this gentleman. We're from a different place, and so we share that. But anyway, Mr. Enslow, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to get you on here. What I wanted to talk to you about and what I want to share with a lot of people is this gentleman is actually one of the main factors in my insight into the religion of the Baha'i community, the spiritual practices that are associated with the Baha'i religion. This is like my main leeway into that leg of spiritual insight. And so Mr. Enslow is a deep well of information in relation to the Baha'i community. But what we're going to get into today is what we always get into, and that is his own personal spiritual experience. And I'm going to start where I always start with all of my guests. And that is asking where and when do you remember your first spiritual experience or experience outside of what is considered the norm of every day?
Well, in sort of preparing for this, there's a number of things that I typically talk about. But just realize that should really begin with the family heritage.
Okay.
And it was like 3 generations ago, 4 generations ago. And my father was named for one of 6 brothers who lived in southern Illinois. And the brothers and their father all enlisted in the Union Army to go in slavery. They sent the father back, the 6 boys went on, and 3 were martyred. And there's a sense that there's a spiritual dynamic which cannot be completely quantified, but it's like there's a spiritual thread within the family, extended family, that's one imagines is somehow related to those martyrs. In fact, I think it says that the martyrs will have an influence for 7 generations.
Mm.
And so there's like a spiritual vibration. This maybe feels more natural. So that's a starting cornerstone. Clearly, that's not where you were anticipating me jumping off that. But.
Well, no, that is actually very exciting. I mean, for some reason, I got goosebumps when you mentioned how deep this goes, because when I met you, there was there was an instant there was an instant energy between us, and I reacted to it, and I had to speak to you about it because it was instant, and I'm like, nah, I got to say something to this. and so I do remember our initial meeting, and so for you talking about it going back into your family generations is pretty exciting, and I did not know that, so pretty interesting. But please tell us more.
Well, there's the other thing more that can be said is that the gentleman that my father's named after had a series of letters back and forth. It's a book this thick of those letters, and I admittedly I've not read them. I know that they're there, and I know where they are in my copies of them. But when you can just imagine the horror of battle in the Civil War times, and somebody being wounded, somebody easily dying from wounds. What that all entailed,
Mhm.
and the courage it took for people to stand up and say that we are one human family. There raises a figment of our imagination, and that there has to be a better way.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And uh, well, there is never, in my opinion, a coincidence in the universe that happens. And so this conversation, stemming all the way back to the Civil War, uh, which is, of course, some of the very beginnings of our country, this nation, America, where we live, and race being a prevalent theme throughout the history of the country. That's something I do want to get into, but I still want you to share your initial consciousness of your own spiritual experience, your very first.
I think the next point that stands out is that in Boy Scouts, there's the different badge track, but then there's also called this God and Country Badge Award, where you spend them sitting down with the minister and reading the Bible and do that process. And for some reason, just sign up. I'll do that. And there was no conscious decision to make that happen, but it did happen. It did involve reading the Bible, and at one point, at about probably 12 or 13, just getting a deep respect for the potency of Christ's message, and how seemingly insignificant crucified carpenter had such an impact upon the planet.
So your initial spiritual experience, because the reason I say spiritual experience is because what you're speaking of definitely could be a spiritual experience, but it's also, I guess, because you're speaking religiously, it's a religious experience. So is there a difference in your mind of what spirituality, like a spiritual experience, may be having some deep intuitive knowing of a thing, and really,
that's the next step.
yeah. So so that's kind of what I'm meaning. Like when you say, so you mentioned that you were working toward a badge of God and country as a
Right.
scout, and so that led you into the Christian religion and the Bible and the stories about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You were 13 years old at this point, correct?
12, 13, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And so was that like your first spiritual experience, or kind of insight that there was spiritual life to us outside of just, going to school and stuff?
Well, that's as good as it gets at that age. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So please go ahead. I'm listening.
The more significant event occurred at the age of 19, and went to Georgetown University out of high school, graduating from University High School here in Bloomington, Indiana.
Okay.
And went to study international economics, thinking that economics does major things to change the world, and to some degree that appears to be the case. But so being in Georgetown, was there during the spring, firing upon college students in Kent State University, and 4 young students were killed. And the whole of Washington, D.C., or the whole of the East Coast and East, probably border of the United States, just erupted and descended on Washington.
So hold on. What is this? This is a historical event. I'm sure what you're talking about, but I'm not. What could you explain a little bit more about what you're talking about here?
Um, and the reason for mentioning it ties into some next steps. But um, there were 4 students that were killed at Kent State, and there was a famous song um, about their execution.
Okay, was there like a sniper?
No, it was the National Guard, and the National Guardsmen opened fire on the students
Oh, okay, okay.
who were demonstrating against the Vietnam War.
I know what you're talking about now. Okay.
Mm.
I'm slightly familiar with this.
Yeah. So somehow, being at Georgetown, there was this instinct to come in and volunteer to be a marshal to that process, which placed me, to the west outside fence of the White House, way out of the way of anything, and sort of watching things go by. And then, but again, for the reason for bringing that up is that, maybe a couple of weeks later, school was over, came back to Bloomington, Indiana, and, for some reason, probably quite naturally, had deep culture shock being with my parents, and was instinctively drawn out to the north end of Lake Yellowwood when it was very pristine forest at that time. It was a favorite campground in Boy Scouts that we would go to. And this would be probably the beginning of a really deep spiritual cornerstone process. And sat under a tree for like 3 hours, just sort of soaked into the feeling of the energy, of existence. And we lived for 6 years in New Zealand, and the Maori people called it Te More, the spirit of life within us. And so there was a process of coming back and connecting with my girlfriend, who was starting into transcendental meditation, and spending the summer doing a lot of meditation and reflection. Come home after work on a survey crew, and we lived in a little white house to the east of the bypass. If you go, it's still there. My dad built it, and he gave me the opportunity to help. If you go up past St. Mark's Church, there's this little house that wasn't gobbled up by the apartments, and it's got pine trees around it. And so would hop over fences and go up and sit on the curb of St. Mark's Church and watch the sunset, and just again carrying on that spiritual meditative process. And
let me ask you, what years were these?
So this would have been 1970, summer of 1970.
Okay.
In the Baha'i writings, Baha'Ullah says that 71 hours of reflection is worth 70 years of pious worship. So that was very helpful.
Say that again, please.
1 hour's reflection or meditation is worth 70 years of pious worship.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, so went back to Georgetown, seeking a spiritual path, a spiritual process, thinking that we can talk about economic change, we can talk about political change and social change movements. But maybe what's the most significant is what happens every second at the heart level. And how do we touch that heart spirit? A very special verse from Baha'u'llah's Arabic hidden word says, "I breathe within thee a breath of my own spirit, that thou mayest be my lover." He goes on talking, "My love is in thee, know it, that thou mayest find me near unto thee." and turn thy sight within thyself. And let me just find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. So there's a deeper connection to a higher creative spiritual process that maybe we're aware of. Within Islam, there is the, the teaching that from Muhammad, peace be upon him, that the spiritual world is as immediate and close to us as our own life vein, and we're constantly, interacting with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what people call what is it that people call feelings? Is it our could be our self desires, or is it this interaction with this higher spiritual power?
Yeah, I think that's one of the. I think that's like for people who are really seeking to discern the purpose of life and their value and expression here. I think it is a necessity to discern the difference between these motivating inspirations that we carry, that we call feelings, because like you said, there are some that are carnal, and then there are those that are spiritual. And so the discerning between the differences is, I think, the human challenge, right?
Baha'Ullah will go on to say that the generating impulse in the animating spirit underlying the whole of creation is for man, and women, the human spirit to come to know and to love God, the Creator.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all part of the learning dimension.
So when you say the learning dimension, do you mean the earth realm?
Well, the dimensions are, cosmic. Okay. How is it that all these that atoms, every creative thing has come forth from nothingness, and it's like the stars are randomly, populated throughout the space in many respects, but they're also more concentrated in galaxies and obviously within our own reality, our own solar system.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the goal is to learn as much as possible.
Right.
Yeah. There's a personal, perspective. Yeah. And the benefit is that we get to keep that knowledge and take it with us.
Yeah.
Along with our friends and praying for our family, and as much as we can learn as possible.
So when you first became a father, and I say this only, and I'm asking because when I became a father, my very first child being born, it felt very much like a spiritual experience. And it was a spiritual experience, and it translated over to a physical experience that the doctor could see in my face and told me, "You should sit down. You're like you're gonna pass out," because it became somewhat overwhelming. And so, I consider that, I don't know how I gauge it, but it feels almost like, and I don't know. This is probably an odd, random question, and it may not even be associated to anything other than just fatherhood and my own personal perspective and perception. But it felt almost like a portion of me left me and went into that child as it was birthed into, and I got lightheaded, like, oh, whoa, like so I don't, as we, like you mentioned, our family and the extension of our own spiritual graces and blessings and attachments and connections, I think that is the value of, like, for me, that is the value of all of the studies in spirit and spirituality, right? To understand those connections, right?
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just wonder when you became a father, or like when you know, like these significant aspects of life, when you got married, or like, did you have any kind of like highlighted insights that are related to self and development?
Not necessarily as deep as what you're describing in terms of marriage or my own children, but Beverly and I had the bounty of being in China for the birth of Rachel's twins, and the first one was brought up, was born and was brought up and put in our arms, and here was this child, and she immediately began sucking on her fingers. So that's a probably the most vivid, birthing feeling that will be fortunately be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Very, very good. That's exciting. I'm glad you had that experience, man. Yeah. Well, tell me about your how did you become a Baha'i? What led you to the Baha'i religion? You said when you were young, it was the Christian faith and you understood Jesus, and that was an inspiration to some degree. And so how did you end up becoming a Baha'i and not a Christian preacher?
We need to come back to that part of the journey. So thank you.
Yes.
So after spending the summer of 1970 meditating and studying whatever, went back to Georgetown, looking for a spiritual path, not knowing what it was.
Mm.
Was in a course on peace studies, in addition to economics. Actually, the concept of talking about the spiritual process being more significant than economics and political science, and it came out from studying Chinese history in the freshman year, and trying to understand what the impact of Mao and the Chinese Communist Revolution was, and that sort of brought together that dynamic of the spiritual process being more significant. So,
Being more significant than the political process?
political and economic.
Okay.
And we can clearly see that historically demonstrated by the message of Christ. The book of Matthew has 23,300 odd words in it. And one would typically have thought that this carpenter would have been laid to rest, and that was that. Nothing would have happened from that. But there's a vibrancy to those words and penetration. And you can see that same vibrancy at different times. It begins with Adam saying, reality is not us worshiping this idol we create before us, but as hard as it may logically seem, but the reality of the Creator is eternal. In some respects unknowable, but in other respects we can still know as much as possible within our capacity. Our reality is to try to seek that Creator, and He begins the process of humanity on that path. And Moses will pick it up. And there are a host of other prophets with we call minor prophets within the Jewish tradition. And then Christ said he says there comes a time we need a new wine and a new wineskin. As humanity's needs expand, we need that renewal. And consider what did people know of when Christ was walking around Galilee? Well, they knew that there was Egypt. They knew that probably a little bit about Persia, you have certainly of Greece and Rome, and the world's just flat. So it is the crisis says, there's many things I have to tell you, cannot bear to hear them. He couldn't say that the world is round and goes around the sun. That just, people would have dismissed anything he was trying to say because of that. But like to be said about every 1,000 years, we need a new backwardly compatible software upgrade for the human spirit. And so we see Muhammad, peace be upon him, 700 years later, and then in 1844 and 1892, between 1844 and 1892, the twin messengers in the Baha'i tradition will leave for humanity's education of 11 million words, which are just beginning to scratch the surface of. But a very interesting point about the start of the Baha'i tradition. The first messenger of the Bab was a 25-year-old merchant in Shiraz, Iran. And there was a process within Islam of people seeking the coming of a new messenger. And the best student in that process was drawn to Shiraz, and the Bab will walk out of to the gate for people coming into Shiraz and find Mullah Hussein, that seeker, and take him to his house. What's also incredibly intriguing is that 48 hours later, on the other side of the planet, Samuel Morse will sit down in the U.S. Capitol and tap out the first tweet, the first Morse message. And so there's a spiritual process and a technological process taking off at the same time to bring the planet together to create a global civilization.
I appreciate that. That is a lot. No. This is something I want to highlight and elaborate and kind of go over a bit, because a perspective like that takes a fair amount of study, because the general mindset that I would love people to have is just as broad as what you just explained, but the average person does not see the perspective of life from such a broad view. And I think that's very unique, and it's I think it's a commendable perspective to have and to hold. And I think it's refreshing. I think people should attempt to have such a broad view. I think it comes from a lot of learning. It's just a wise long range perspective view, a very broad view, a very breathy view of society and where we are and how we got here. And so I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, that is a very clear, that is, I don't want to, like become a what they call one who's a protagonist or whatever, or just, like tooting the horns of the Bahai Faith. But the understanding and the clarity of the timelessness of the message of the Creator throughout history, through beings representing that message being clarified, but the truth remaining so succinct throughout the history, is something that I think people need to be able to see. And those who are able to see that, I think, are quite blessed. So I guess I am tooting the horns of the Baha'is, because they seem to have this as a common understanding as part of their religions.
Well, in some respects, the other religions have it in their own genre too. Because Christ is reaching back, and actually Moses is reaching back and building on Abraham. Christ will say, "If you knew Moses, you would know me." The sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice, and so that he was inviting people to look closely at the spirit within his words. Muhammad, peace be upon him, will do the same thing, reaching back into all of Abraham as a quintessential man of faith and spirit, is willing to seek the Creator and to obey the Creator under very difficult circumstances. And we see that woven in different aspects of the Quran. There's a very famous chapter in the Quran called the Surah of Joseph. There's also a Surah of Mary.
Yeah, I am aware. As a I lived as a Muslim for many years, and so the stories that are in the Quran about Jesus are actually, I think, in some ways more detailed than some of the stories that you find in Christianity. And so the truth of the matter is that the Creator has always spoken to us. And yes, I agree, everything that you said. And so it's kind of sad that the times that we live in, there are so many who just resist the idea of religion because of all of the stigmas that have gone with it for so long, and the negative aspects that people tend to highlight more so than the spiritual aspects and the advancements that we've gained as a species. What do you think about that? I mean, in the times that we're in, and how people are just like, no, religion. No, I don't care I don't want it for religion. What do you think about that?
Well, Baha'u'llah prophesies that process would emerge. The people would see that religion is the problem and try to wipe it out, maybe even more so than what they have now. Certainly within the communist ideology, that's very much in play. But he said there would come a time when people would feel a need for religion, and then people would start searching it out. And that's exactly what happened to my beloved son-in-law in China. Is that he grew up atheist in a town in central China. He was in Beijing, working in an office, and he, for some reason, was drawn to seeking reality. And Abdul'Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, would say that the solution to all the conflict is that we join together to seek true reality. How is it that gravity comes into existence? What can explain that? What can explain the beauty of the creation around us?
Mm-hmm.
And that when we do that, we can see that the different religious perspectives that emerged because of the needs and capacities of people at the time. The Jewish tradition has this really distinct separation between believers and non-believers, because the believers had to protect themselves from this temptation and energy to pull them into the paganism, which was incredibly challenging. Muhammad, peace be upon him, is having exactly the same challenge between belief and paganism. So there's a lot of complex processes that have gone into play, I think, as you alluded to. But there comes a time when these 11 million words that are in the Baha'i tradition, plus Baha'u'llah's son and his grandson and others, the refreshing insights become like an ocean of new knowledge that lifts everything up and moves it forward. And we're a really unique time in human history that Again, what was the world like in 1844 in Indiana? Well, we were sending mail by either stagecoach or Pony Express if we really had to get something there quickly. The railroad was maybe just beginning. It was starting up in Madison or Jeffersonville. Eventually, would wind through either Columbus or Bloomington to get to Indianapolis and Chicago. It was, how vast, this efflorescence of creative process is underway, and you could climb into a metal tube weighing thousands and thousands of pounds and get lifted off the ground and fly to the other side of the plant in 20 hours.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I often talk about the transformative times that we live in. I make little shorts, and sometimes I will make a 20-minute, 30-minute video talking about the transformative times that we live in. In fact, I consider myself to be an ambassador for the kingdom of heaven that is to come. I've said it boldly. I'm sure people probably say he crazy as a June bug, but I honestly feel like we are in the process of a world that is leaving out and a world that is coming in. One that was once based on competition and dog eat dog mentality and I'm better than you mentality. And I'm, praying and feeling and inspired that we are coming into the reality that cooperation is the way, and that once we unify and bring together the different varieties of character traits that are already in our community, and we unify and start working towards things, we bring together a different kind of world, and that the visions that we hold in our heart and in our head about what we want to see are just as potent and effective and true as what we see on the news about the concerns that we fear of what is to come based on, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, you know what I mean? So I think we're on the cusp of something really beautiful. And if we believe in ourselves and believe in the good of other people and the light of the world and the light of the purpose of us all being here, I think we have a great opportunity to create a different environment. I think the consistent fear that's pushed on us through the news and through, and I just want to say this, and I don't know, I really wonder what you think about this, but I've been having this conversation with many people, and this thing that you are born a sinner, I think that has been such a hindrance to so many of us in the idea of the capability of our goodness, of our ability to express the highest version or vision of ourselves. I think that mentality has really done a number on the people in the West. So I'd love to hear your wise insights on that.
Well, the wisdom is not mine. It comes from Baha'Ullah, again, the hidden words, and very close to what was pretty much what was offered just a few minutes ago. I have breathed within the breath of my own spirit that thou mayest be my lover. That spirit is holy. It's a universe folded within us. And that, as you say, our purpose is to expand that universe as much as possible. So each of us does have potential of building positive things. But we have a dual nature of, Abdul'Baha will say that, and Baha'u'llah, that yes, we have our brain has got. I think at the core, it said that at the core of our brain is a lizard brain. It's there to find food and have sex and procreate. But then somehow this unique, miracle of the human brain and consciousness is expanded to begin to look and see how the world works and how we can work with the creative spirit around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's extremely important. In fact, for most of the people who may watch the show, I've talked about My Brother's Library Incorporated. That is my vision, my intention, my reason for being here, which is what I say is a part of, God's kingdom that is to come. It is a new educational format that I believe is for the betterment of our species. And so that is actually how I met Dan Enslow. There was a prayer meeting, and in my neighborhood, someone had placed a flyer for this prayer meeting on my door, and it had the golden rule from several different religions written on it, and it was an invitation to a prayer meeting. And when I saw this invitation, I was highly excited, because when you read the golden rule from all of the different religions, they are generally saying the same thing. And this is what I had come to from my own personal studies. And so when I saw this all together, it was very exciting. And I said, oh my God, I have to go to this. This is like, right? Like, this is a sign. I have to go. I have to go to this prayer meeting. And I went to the prayer meeting, and at the prayer meeting, this was at I call her my spiritual sister, Naomi's house. And this is where I met Dan at. And in the meeting, I talked about, the vision that God had given me about this community center and the kids and the 24 hours and the education and the whatnot. And, I didn't realize that I was at a Baha'i prayer meeting. I just realized, I thought it was a community prayer meeting. So it was a variety of people of different religions, which was fine with me. But in talking about this vision that I felt God gave me, I got information about the Baha'i religion, and one of the major highlighted tenets of the religion and the faith was the teaching of children. And so to me, it was more than just a sign. And so it was not very much longer before I considered myself to be a Baha'i. And that is how we met. And so, I'd like you to share a little bit about that, if you would.
About our meeting?
Our meeting and the education of children, the importance of it.
I'm going to have to apologize because I don't have a big sense of that meeting and how we went forward from there. But
not as transformative for you as it was for me. So I'm fully understanding that. But yeah, whatever you can muster, and then of course, please elaborate on the necessity for us to educate the children.
Absolutely, yeah. No, if we wanted to create a better world, a new civilization, the best way is to train next generations and train the mothers who can then become the best new educators of children. Mm-hmm. So the mothers are maybe, like in the Baha'i tradition, the first priority is to educate the young girls so that they can be the educated mothers. So if you have a choice between investing in educating a girl or a son, you educate the girl. But again, it's helping them to see reality. So, like this shirt and other shirts like it are worn, around my granddaughter, who essentially lives with us. I hope that she begins to see that to think about a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's, you know, it's how the beauty of science and religious process coming together. So almost every night, Beverly and myself will have a devotional study and prayers together. But in the background, there's YouTube videos of birds. You know, the amazing life spirit within the bird and how the different permutations of birds are, and how they can do what they do. Abdul'Baha says there's two ways to understand reality and connect with reality, and one is through the messengers who reflect uniquely the knowledge and spirit of the Creator, but then it's also is the beauty of the creation around us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am quite in agreement with that. This is why this channel exists. It is to make spirituality more common to the everyday man, to kind of bring it out of the closet and the mystery and the spookiness of it. Like I said, to make it water cooler talk. Yeah, so that we're not so alienated from our spiritual selves and our souls and the aspects of reality that feed and negate and, you know, uplift and bring down. Because if you don't know these things, then you don't know, you know, how it's being affected or why it's being affected, or, you know, if you can power it up, or if you can, you know, all of these things are like, for me, that was like always something I wanted to know. Is just my whole life a very, you know, very high interest. Like, what are we here for? What are we doing? What is the influence? What is our power? What is our effect? Okay, God exists. So people say you got to pray to God. Well, if I pray to God, okay, what does God do? And then what do I do? And am I supposed to pray to God for everything? Or is he giving me enough power to do so much stuff myself that I'm not supposed to go to him for everything, because I'm supposed to trust that he gave me? You know what I'm saying? All of these questions. And so if people don't have these questions, I kind of feel sorry for you. But these are the questions I think that are the most important questions of your life, right? Like, how are you not interested in those things? These are the most important things to me on the earth. And so being trapped in the matrix is a sad fact that we see so many people, you know, all of their attention and all of their energy and all of their focus and all of their efforts are toward only the physical reality of this world and food and pleasure and, you know, what people think of them, or, you know, entertainment, or, you know, yeah, things of the world. And so, yeah, I am one of those who have all my life had a deep longing for the understanding of the spiritual aspects of myself. And, you know, over the years of all of my studies, I feel like one of the things that I want the world to know, or that I like to share with the world, is that I feel like I've come to some sound and succinct conclusions about life and about God and about why we're here. And I feel like those are the things that I try to share. Like, I feel like we're here to express ourselves to our fullest ability. Okay. What I feel like is wrong in general is that most people aren't comfortable expressing themselves. And one of the things that happens is it's impossible for you to reach your fullest potential or to be your very best self if you're not willing to express yourself to your fullest ability. Mm-hmm. Our society socially has so many stigmas and stipulations about the level of expression that people are comfortable with, which I think is limiting us all and limiting the graces that come from your full expression or my full expression, or, you know what I mean? So I'm missing something because you're afraid to express yourself fully. You know what I'm saying? But if it did, there would be a gain in my own personal life and energy. And so I think these are the things that I'm learning and experiencing. And so this is what I like to express to people, because I think at the core of it all, we're all the same. And so if I learn these things and I discover them and I share them and I believe them to be true and I prove them to be effective, then maybe I can shortcut some things for some other people, and they don't have to bump their head as much as I did on the way.
Very good.
Yeah, and so that's why I always appreciated who you are and your willingness to share, and your depth and breadth of knowledge, bro. And so I don't want to hold you much longer, but I do want you to share any thoughts or anything that you wanted to give, or thoughts that you might wanted to share with the people. You know, we're on the internet. We could be being viewed by, you know, billions of people. You know, you got grandkids in China, so you know we could be viewed by all of the world. So what would you like to share with the world before you go, Mr. Enslow?
Thank you. So there's a drawback to, you know, the point at which was attracted and then actually embraced the Bahai Faith. Again, was seeking a spiritual solution beginning my sophomore year at Georgetown, and after about 6 weeks, my girlfriend says, "Well, you really need to let's go talk to my Baha'i friend." Well, there was only one Baha'i on the Georgetown campus at that time. But we went over to her apartment, and sat down. She and her husband talked to me for a good hour and a half. Cannot remember a word of what she said at all. But she gave me a book to take home. It's a history and collection of Baha'i passages. But that night there was this really powerful dream of a deep spiritual connection, and it felt like all my inner reality just disconnected and dropped out. And I went back to her the next morning and said, "You know, this happened." She says, "That's great. Now you can put yourself back together." So that began a process of studying, but attraction to the words of Baha'Ullah and Abdul'Baha particularly. And my girlfriend and I were going to go home and talk to her parents over Thanksgiving, and you know, sort of share with them our process and, you know, what we might be thinking of. But we were at this Galen's apartment the night before leaving to come back to Bloomington, and there was this, you know, strong energy that, yeah, I had to sign up. And came home on the drive back from the Indianapolis airport. I was talking to my parents. Says, "Oh yeah, when you were 2 years old, we took you to the Baha'i Temple in Chicago, and you were crawling around on the floor." My dad was a really inquisitive guy, and he had a niece who was going to Northwestern University, and we went and checked it out.
Oh, very, very interesting.
There's been a lot of study after that, and the study has to happen every morning and every night to be as effective as possible. And sometimes it's hard to do.
Yeah, I am sure. So I do have a question. So your parents, was there a religious, you know, upbringing? Were they Christians or?
Okay, so we attended what was the First Baptist Church, and we in Bloomington, now known as First United Church. It's just west of Eastland Plaza. Virginia Catholic Church. And originally it was downtown. There's a parking lot just west of the First Christian Church.
Okay.
I think it is, yeah, First Christian. That was the First Baptist Church, and they moved out here to the east side of Bloomington. And my mother was the secretary to the minister for a number of years when she was in high school. So that ran in the family, and we continued it. And was taken to Sunday school and participated in that, and junior youth activities within the church. But they couldn't really communicate their own deep sense of faith, or how to pass that on necessarily. Or at least there's not a deep memory of that. Or sort of letting me find my own path.
Okay. And so when you mentioned that you told your father or your parents that you were a Baha'i now, right. And then they mentioned that, you were there at 2 years old.
Right.
So they were they were somewhat familiar with the Bahai Faith, I assume, right?
A little bit, much more than anybody else in Indiana, because so few people knew about it. But,
still to this day, I agree.
There's never ever talk about this shirt, and I tell them about all the atoms of the universe and the essence of all created things for our training. And then I ask people, have you heard of the Bahai Faith? Nope.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's not common that people have, but I think when you state some of the quotes, people may have heard the quotes, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've heard that quote." I've heard people more familiar with quotes from the Bahai Faith than the Bahai Faith. So, which is a unique experience in itself. I guess things are spreading in the time and the pace that it is supposed to, and so
yeast will do what it does, and percolate and make things happen.
Yes, sir.
But it's the Baha'i dynamic process is very similar to Christianity in terms of how it spreads and lifts people up. But it's actually a lot more further down the road than Christ's message was. Again, Christianity was protected and nurtured by this very small handful of believers. Oppressed. Paul was probably the best educated of them. At one time, he was vehemently attacking the Christians, and yet that will change, and it's his knowledge that helps to lift the beliefs up and carry it to Rome, and he's in Rome, proclaiming and propagating. Okay. It's 230 years after Christ's crucifixion that the leaders of Rome will say, "Okay, let's become Christian, because it's what we need." But
it's because it's convenient, no?
Well, it touched people's. It was more better than cutting open chickens and dropping the intestines on an altar and saying, "Well, this is reality."
I got you. Yes, sir. Like when you it just went. I'll just say, So when you mentioned that, when you said the spread of the Baha'i faith was similar to the Christian faith, instantly my mind went to the Crusades, and I'm like, how?
No.
Right? Like
Earlier day.
like no, what? No, I just went totally different when you said. I'm like, no. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's the power of the Christians in the catacombs that were coming together and praying together and teaching their children and raising up new insight. But we'll definitely invite people to go to Bahai.org, BAHAI.org. And you can see the scope of the development. And Baha'u'llah was in probably one of the noblest family of Persia. And everything is stripped from him. He's picked up. He's exiled to Baghdad, and then to Constantinople in Western Turkey. And then the Sultan of Turkey will put him in his Abu Ghraib Alcatraz Guantanamo Bay prison in Akka, just north of Haifa, on the west side of the east coast of the Mediterranean, to wipe him out. After 2.5 years in the prison, he's so beloved that the Mufti of Akka will come and beg him to walk out of the prison with him. So nothing could hold this message back and stop him. And then over time, he and son will go over to Haifa and they'll climb up the slope of Mount Carmel, stand halfway up the slope, and agree that this is where the sacred remains of the first messenger, the Bab, would be entombed and memorialized. And then he would go to the top of Mount Carmel and chant this beautiful tablet called the Tablet of Carmel, right next to the Cave of Elijah. So there's this fulfillment of Jewish tradition and could be said Christian tradition of coming back to the sacred land.
Yeah, there are many prophecies that are associated that I think people who are interested in prophecies and the mysteries of the connections between religion, I think are a lot of those are very interesting facts and points that can be noted in the Baha'i faith, and that there are actually a couple of movies, right, that are produced about the Baha'i faith. What are the titles?
I'm not sure that. Well, one is called The Prisoner of Akka. But if you go to YouTube and type in Baha'i, then you get a whole slew of different options. Okay. Really neat lectures on like the immortality of the spirit and the life of the spiritual world.
Well, we are glad to have had you. This has been a bevy of information. I think people who are interested and wanting to know more about their own spiritual path and the closeness of spirituality to the reality of this life, the merging of spirituality and science, all of these things are aspects of the Baha'i faith. And I myself am Baha'i. I have been for many years. And I think that most people would understand and relate to what we believe as Baha'is, but that's for you to go choose and to check and to, travel along that path to discover what is for you. But I just wanted to bring this gentleman on. And as always, like I always say, all roads lead to spirit. And this is one of the guys who got me to where I am. So I wanted to bring him on and find out a little bit more about him, Mr. Dan Enslow. And anything else you want to say to the people before we go, sir?
Yeah, what was just coming to mind is think deeply about our own bodies. The amazing complexity of the human brain and how it's able to, probably the most complex organism on the planet.
Mm.
And then how the blood vessels are all, perfectly distributed throughout the body, and there's like what, 3 or 4 different, well, probably 4 different layers within each blood vessel, to allow for a smooth flow of blood, and then the nerves and the adrenal system and the way of managing sugar, and you know how perfectly it all fits together. And it's
Now,
hard to imagine that happens by random chance.
now you mentioned that, and now I have to mention this because you did. It's a study they were doing on. In fact, there's a guy. His name is Greg Brayton, and they did a study. And his specialty is the merging of science and spirituality. It's Greg Brayton Official is the YouTube channel. But he's talking about how they have done some sequencing of DNA, and at the core, somehow there is written on the DNA in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it is written on the DNA, Yahweh, eternal, inside man. He says this is written on the DNA. I'm not that level scientific to go and see it myself, but there's a video of this, and I'm like, oh wow. So yeah, it is just beautiful, the merging of science and spirit, because I think it'll bring such a clarity to our next generations.
Abdul'Baha says the unity of science and religion will wash away all war and hatred.
Yeah. And so I think I'm in time and on time, and I'm just glad that I know who I am, and I feel like I'm doing my job and I'm in the right place at the right time. So
Great.
Yes, sir. Like I said, thank you all for being here. This is
Thank you.
Yeah. And for everybody watching around the world, I will see you next time. This is my mentor and teacher, Mr. Dan Enslow, and I hope you all got something great from this video. And like I said, always, all roads lead to spirit, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.